Welcome to Cloud Coffee and Certs, the podcast where we chat about cloud certifications, learning cloud skills, and staying confident on the tech journey. Grab your coffee, relax, and let's level up together.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode. And this week we will be covering our AWS ANS certification syllabus walkthrough. Now, I really wanted to bring some security news to you guys around cloud security, but well, to be honest, it was one of those weeks where I was not able to find any content worth sharing. Of course, there are a lot of security incidents around different parts of infrastructure, but anything covering cloud or cloud security, I was not able to find. So I thought maybe today's episode will be just wrapping up our AWS ANS certification syllabus walkthrough. And one more thing which I did last week was to book my certification exam as well. I booked it for May first week. Now, if you want to continue this journey along with me, then it's worth booking for yourself as well. I mean, for me, it was 50% off because I was already AWS certified in security specialty last year. If you have done like similar certification from AWS, then it will be 50% discounted price for you as well. So it costed me around 150 USDs, and you can easily calculate how much it will cost in your local currency as well. But anyhow, I have booked the examination, so sort of it will give me a target date now, which is May first week, before which we have to wrap up all the course content. That's why I thought even if we don't have any like cloud security news worth sharing this week, maybe I should come again before my regular bi-weekly episode. So I'm coming back this Sunday as well to record with you guys the AWS syllabus walkthrough of ANS certification. So this will help us in kickstarting our content of the certification course. And one of the topic which I feel which should be really good to start with will be VPC basics. So if you want to check out like VPC basics, then of course don't forget to listen to the next episode. But of course this episode is also worth listening as well because I am covering all the domain wise pending topics for domain 2, 3 and 4. Domain 1 we have covered last week as well, so I won't be covering that again, but I thought maybe I will just give you at least the task statement as in just the title of domain 1 as well, just to revise you guys. So after this short break, I will be covering domain 1 task statements, just titles, and then we'll be going through domain 2, 3 and 4.
Let's level up, refill coffees, and dive into the main episode.
All right, welcome back. So we will be starting our syllabus walkthrough of AWS ANS certification. And like I mentioned, I will be covering domain 1 titles only. So domain 1 was network design, and it covers up to 30% of the examination questions. What it will test us? It will test us around edge network services for global performance, DNS design across environments, load balancing for high availability, logging and monitoring across networks, routing and hybrid connectivity, and multi-account, multi-region networking. So these 6 task statement will be covered as part of domain 1. I covered the details of each task statement in last week episode, so if you haven't checked that out yet, then of course it's worth checking that as well. Now let's continue with domain 2. Now domain 2 is network implementation. So in this, the focus is on hands-on building and configuring real-world network solutions on AWS. This domain makes up roughly 26% of the exam, and it tests not just theory, but you can understand from the domain name itself. It also tests our practical implementation skills, which we will be using in the field. So it's not only about the concepts, we have to really know how to implement those concepts in the production or even development environment. I mean, because this is an examination, so of course you are not expected to really work in production environment. So even if we are able to perform some of the task statements in the lab, if we are able to like test few scenarios, then it's worth mentioning here. Now first up, the task is 2.1, which is hybrid routing and connectivity. In this task, we will be implementing routing and connectivity between on-premise network and AWS cloud. I think I covered it in one of the topic of task statement 1 as well, but as the name implement, this is more towards not the concept but practical side of things. So they want us to understand and implement more on how we can establish routing and connectivity between on-premises networks and AWS cloud. Now, what we need to know here is how to choose and configure different protocols, like if you want to use like static and dynamic routing, because what we want to ensure is traffic flows correctly between environments. I mentioned last time as well, a multi-cloud multi-region scenario is kind of give us the best of all the worlds, and there's no point of setting up multi-region multi-cloud if you don't ensure that there's connectivity across those two different locations or those two different types of infrastructure as well. Now, in this, we will also work with VPNs, which are virtual private networks across the two sites. And it also includes physical connection. AWS does provide a physical connectivity option as well using AWS Direct Connect, or you can have some VPNs which are running on the internet, so site to site VPNs. We have to understand networking fundamentals like layer 2, layer 3 constructs such as VLANs, IP addressing, gateways, switching, and routing. Now, VLANs are not necessarily a concept onto the cloud, but we should be having some level of understanding, because if you are connecting your cloud infra to on-prem, then on-prem actually deals with VLANs, layer 2 switching, bridging, and everything. So we have to understand from on-prem perspective as well. I'm not sure this topic will be going in detail on the on-prem networking side of concepts, but it's worth understanding them as well, because if they are mentioning it in the exam, so maybe it will come like a scenario where you have to understand a bit of everything. Now, this topic also tests our ability to integrate traffic management tools like transit gateways, especially for SD-WAN type of solution or scenarios, configure DNS resolution across the environment. We can also set up load balancing solutions, and we have to validate our setup by testing connectivity with tools like Route Analyzer and Reachability Analyzer. Monitoring and logging is, of course, part of picture as well. So we have to ensure that we can observe what traffic is flowing from in and out. It will not only help us in troubleshooting if there is some sort of connectivity loss, or if you want to create a sort of like a high availability sort of networking, but it will also help us from the security perspective as well. If there is a malicious traffic flowing onto our network, we should be able to inspect the traffic and monitor the logs for any sort of abnormality. So this is task statement 2.1. In 2.2, we will be having again multi-account and multi-region connectivity, which is about expanding the connectivity across multiple AWS accounts, regions, and VPCs. Now, in real enterprise environment, this is quite often that we have to span our network across the accounts or region. And of course, AWS provide a lot of different patterns, solutions, and services to implement that. For example, we can choose VPC peering. We can rely on Transit Gateway as a central hub for multi VPC communication. We can implement VPNs as well. And of course, Cloud WAN, which is a big multi transit gateways across the region managed by AWS solution. It's kind of like the biggest elephant which can control everything, like what's going in and out into your network. We can also use AWS mechanisms for sharing the resources using Resource Access Manager to share network resources across the accounts. So this task will test our ability to configure hub spoke architecture, managing inter-VPC routing, ensure service-to-service connectivity, and it will include how DNS resolution works across the hybrid mesh. So it's not only the DNS resolution between two sites, now it's part of like this hybrid mesh infrastructure. And again, security plays a role here too, because we don't want to miss security at any cost. So we'll be covering concepts like security groups, knackles, firewalls, which help us protect boundaries between network segments. Now, task statement 2.3 is around advanced DNS architecture. In this task, we will be tackling complex hybrid and multi-account DNS setups. So we must know when to use a public and private hosted zones, because AWS provide both kind of DNSs. One of the DNS, when we tag it as public zone will be then having accessibility or reachability from the public network, while we can also set up a private zone route 53, which will be only used by VPCs which are in your private network. So those won't be reachable from outside network. And again, it depends on your use case. So if your application is not public facing, like you don't want your application to reach from outside the network, of course there is no point of using this, right? So that's why we have like these different type of public and private hosted zones. We have to know how and when to implement conditional forwarding, how and when to configure aliases, a records, txt records, pointer records to support hybrid application. We also have to deal with DNS delegation for added security and how to share DNS services between the accounts using RAM. The big part of this skill set is practical implementation, because configuring DNS zones, adjusting the traffic policies based on latency and OS geography, and monitoring the DNS behavior, everything is really important, not only from scalability of your network, but also from the perspective of security. So we have to cover some of the pillars here. We have to make sure operational excellence. So we have to make sure that operationally our DNSs are always in there for application to use. We also have to make sure they are scalable. We have to make sure that they are secure as well. So all the well architected framework which we have discussed multiple times in our previously discussion we had for AWS security specialty, you can go and check out those episodes as well. I covered well architected framework pretty well before we unfortunately have to switch off our AWS security specialty examination because AWS doesn't like it that I'm sharing the knowledge with you guys free of course. So maybe they have discontinued because they listen to my podcast as well. I'm not sure. But yes, you can check those episodes to understand well architected framework. Now in task statement 2.4, we will be covering automate and configure network infrastructure, which moves into network automation and infrastructure configuration. Now networking automation and infrastructure configuration, I think those automation are really scary words if someone who is just now starting onto the cloud trying to understand the networking concept suddenly have to deal with automation as well. It's like, wait, I don't even know how to do it manually, man. Why you are teaching me how to automate this stuff? First I have to know how I can do it with my own hands in manual and older way. But again, because this certification actually really target that concept, we have to understand it. And I'm sure because it's about AWS only, so they might be using just cloud formation and other IAC tools, not Terraform, sure, because Terraform is kind of like a multi-vendor which is not AWS specific, so they won't be covering Terraform in this certification exam. But let's check out in the details. So they do want us to use infrastructure as code, and yes, they are covering tools like AWS CloudFormation, AWS Cloud Development Kit, CDK, CLIs or SDKs to consistently provision and manage our networking resources. Now, I, to be honest, is really in favor of it because I am working in similar sort of setup. I have worked in past as well, where scalability is really, really big concern if you are using manual ways of deployment. So if you really want your infrastructure to scale, so it's not about only about like saving your time in terms of initial configuration. If you want to continuously add more resources into your infrastructure, then of course automation and infra as a code helps a lot. So it's good that they are covering this aspect as part of the domain wise test as well. Now, beyond these static templates of configuring the infrastructure, AWS is also expecting us to understand event driven automation. So how to eliminate risky hard coded values in templates, how to reduce human error through repeatable automated workflows. And what they want us to achieve, they want us to make sure that we are creating efficient low cost network deployments that we can safely scale to higher limits. Now in summary, I feel that domain 2 will really push our domain one's knowledge from planning to actual implementation, and everything from hybrid cloud and multi VPC connectivity to advanced DNS, automated provisioning. It will really demonstrate like our real world capability to not just design but actually build and maintain the sophisticated AWS network architecture. I hope you guys are clear with domain 1 and domain 2. If you guys have any questions around that, then of course let me know in the comments, and then I'll be try to find more information onto that. Maybe something bits sometime I miss myself. So if you feel like something is missing or something need to be explained in better way, then just let me know and I'll try to grab more resources around that. But anyways, let's switch to domain 3 now, which is network management and operation. Now you see the trajectory here. They wanted us to plan first or design first in domain 1. They wanted us to implement in domain 2, like how we can do this stuff hands on. And around end of domain 2, they mentioned a bit about automation. Domain 3 is now building more into domain 2, which is around management and orchestration as well as operation. So this is why I like the content of this compared to AWS security specialty, because each domain, each task statement is nicely fitting one on top of another. So it's not like domain 2 have some topics which are prerequisite or which give you a building block of domain 1 or domain 2. So, as part of domain 3, what we want is we want to make sure that our networking is healthy, available, and efficient. So, this domain accounts for 20% of the exam and again focuses on practical skills we will be using daily once your network is designed and deployed. So, domain 1, designing, domain 2, deployment, domain 3, operations. So, in task statement 3.1, manage routing and connectivity. In real world environments, when we have like static networks, they easily evolve, scale, and connect with on premise environment. Again, multi cloud, multi regions. I keep on saying this statement again and again. In task statement 3.1, we will be expected to know how to maintain routing and connectivity across AWS hybrid networks. This means you will need to be familiar with routing protocols, and like in the context of AWS Direct Connect, we might have to understand more about BGP or VPNs, how different AWS components such as transit gateways, Direct Connect gateways, virtual interfaces help link our environment. We also need to understand how routing limits and quotas might impact design decisions. I mean, I recall in one of the deployment lately, we were right in the end of our code, like we have written everything for the new deployment in one of the region, only to realize that cloud WAN, which we use heavily, is not supported in that region. So we have to end up like scratching everything, write up everything from the perspective of another region. So limitations around the regions where your particular service is supported or not, or quotas, they really impact design decisions. And even troubleshooting the static and dynamic routing issues, everything comes in a play. Maintaining private access path is really important as well. So reachability, and I mentioned before as well, we can use VPC reachability analyzer. So we can use this quite heavily to check the connectivity and routing between the different locations. Now, in short, this task will test our ability to ensure that data keeps flowing where it needs to go. So, from point A to point B, data should be reaching, the packet should reach from one location or source from destination. That's the whole point of setting the networking, right? In task statement 3.2, we will be monitoring and analyzing network traffic. Now, once our network is running, the biggest challenge is visibility and observability, knowing what's happening between your interfaces or different paths. This task revolves around monitoring and analyzing network traffics. So, our tools provided by AWS, they can really help in this concept. So, we have to be familiar with all those tools which AWS provide, like Amazon CloudWatch, VPC Flowlooks, traffic mirroring. They will help us to understand the connectivity patterns. They will help us in spotting the anomalies. And of course, we can easily identify and fix any sort of performance bottlenecks. We also have to use tools like Reachability Analyzer, Transit Network Gateway Manager to visually map topology and validate that our routing and configurations meet the intent result. Troubleshooting is core part of this. So we have to understand all those concepts around packet sizing, expected latency, if there's a routing loop, because this task measures how well we can detect the issues, and we have to use AWS tools to diagnose them. Task statement 3.3 covers optimizing networks for performance, reliability, and cost. This task statement pushes us into optimization because operational excellence isn't just about fixing your problem. We have to also make sure that we continuously improve the network for performance, resilience, and cost efficiency. So we have to understand when to use VPC peering versus transit gateways because sometimes the scenario might require us to use a different solution, even though we have like multiple solutions which can solve the same problem. We have to understand when to reduce bandwidth usage by using some sort of like efficient traffic patterns, and we also have to understand about different sort of network interfaces as well because AWS does provide again a lot of services. We have to know about those services as well. Configuration choices also will be covering route 50 DNS, load balancing, subnet sizing. Everything is covered as part of this optimization concept because optimization ties back into monitoring. The better we understand about traffic patterns, performance metrics, the more intelligently we can refine our architecture to meet SLAs and control AWS expenses. So, in summary, domain 3 is where design, which we have built as part of domain 2, meets our operations. It tests our ability to maintain connectivity, see into network's behavior using AWS tools, and make informed decisions that boost performance and reduce costs. Master these skills, and you will not only ace this part of certification, but also become deeply effective at the real world cloud network operations. So, domain 3 really interesting because now we are covering operations part of what we have built as part of domain 2 and what we have designed as part of domain 1. Now, domain 4 is none other than security and governance because how we can miss security and governance when we are recording a podcast in cloud security because we don't want to end up doing a certification which doesn't hover around security at all. Security is a key theme of our podcast, and of course I want to cover a certification which also cover those aspects as well. Now in domain 4 we will be exploring network security, compliance, and governance. So, in this section of AWS ANS, we have to understand how we can protect, monitor, audit, and govern the networks on AWS and in hybrid environments. So, we cannot leave our on prem environment behind. We have to make sure that we are covered from everywhere because I mentioned in one of the scenarios in last week episode where one of the site was safe, but because you have east to west connectivity between different sites, maybe your second site is not as secure as your first one, and then it will lead to all sort of attacks on the second site. So we have to understand that in hybrid environment, all the plugs, all the gates are covered. Now in this domain, it makes up around 24% of the exam, and we will be covering security fundamentals, real world controls, and compliance visibility. Our statement 4.1 covers implementing and maintaining network security feature. So in this, we have to meet our networking with security and compliance requirements. So this section will test both our theoretical understanding and practical skills in designing secure network infrastructure. And the reason I can tell you why because we have to identify different threat models based on applications architecture. So think in terms of what can go wrong or from where potentially your attackers can try to get into your environment. So if you are working as a network architect, doesn't mean that you don't care about how your application is using that network because ultimately network is there to serve an application, right? So we have to recognize common security threats and how they can manifest and change or affect our network traffic. From there, AWS does expect us to apply the controls to protect the network traffic flow as well. So this will include we have to secure inbound traffic using AWS WAF, AWS Shield, or maybe AWS Network Firewall as well. So this will help us in protecting the apps which are exposed to the internet. We also have to make sure our outbound traffic is secure as well because I have seen a lot that people don't usually care about the outbound traffic. All they care about it what's coming inside the network from outside, but they don't care like what's leaving from your network to outside because anything which leaves from your network to outside may cover some sensitive information as well. So we have to apply all sort of firewalls, proxies, gateway load balancer to filter and inspect egress connections as well. Layer level internal traffic segmentation and restriction with security groups, NACLs, and VPC endpoint policies can give another layer of defense in depth. We also need to design architecture that meets compliance needs, like we have to create isolated untrusted network, create parameter VPCs, or separating workloads using three-tier model, and build incident detection and alerting into the environment. Task statement 4.2 is around validate and audit security using monitoring and logging. So once our protections are in place, the next challenge is verification and auditing. That's where this task comes in. So we will here look into various AWS visibility services like CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Prologs, traffic mirroring, because all these tools help us in extending our observability arms, so we can check alarms and metrics, we can track API activities, we can even have network traffic visibility. We also need to understand that network creates a lot of logs, so how we can deliver these logs reliably to maybe a centralized location or maybe our SIM using Kinesis, Firehose, or CloudWatch logs, how we can analyze them to spot anomalies and compliance violations. We may need to set up automated alarms and custom metrics as well, how we can correlate data from multiple sources, with network configurations at scales using AWS trusted advisors, security group reviews, etc. This task statement 4.2 is more about auditing what you have built so far. In task statement 4.3, which also happened to be our last task statement for this course, is protecting confidentiality of data and communication. So in this, we will be covering on confidentiality, which covers encrypting data and protecting communication both in transit and across hybrid links. So key areas are like you have to increase the right network encryptions as well, because it's not about securing your data when it's on rest. We have to also secure the data when it's in transit. So for example, we can use IPsec for VPNs. We can use TLS for app traffic, or maybe for your S3 buckets as well. Understanding the AWS shared responsibility model and how in-flight encryption fits all into this. We also have to make sure that our DNS communication is secure. So we can use DNSSEC, which help in protecting domain name resolution. Of course, AWS does provide some certificates as well. So services like AWS Certification Manager or Private CA can help in generating the certificates and keys without exposing the sensitive material. So in domain 4, we will be covering network security front and center, from designing secure traffic flows, capturing the telemetry, encrypting communication from the point of view of a security architect. Because it's not about only mastering the network architect, but we have to also make sure that it's secure, compliant, and auditable. Now, from domain 1 to domain 4, it's all nicely stacked. First, we design the infrastructure, then we build. Once it's built, we have to make sure that our day 1 and day 2 configuration monitoring and alarm and all the practices around operations is covered. And last but not least, we have to make sure that everything we have built so far not only is operationally excellent but also secure as well. So we have to make sure that all our security configurations or security tools are monitoring our traffic and they are generating right logs. Those logs can be analyzed anytime. And we also have to make sure that we are creating a network design which is not only secure but auditable as well. So it's covering all the compliance. So if you are hosting maybe PCI applications onto your cloud infra, then what sort of additional security tools you should be having or using, or what sort of design recommendations you should have in your network side as well. Because although your data is stored in applications or in S3 buckets maybe, but they are still flowing on a backbone network, and you as a cloud network architect is responsible for making sure that the network infra you have designed or network connectivity you have put in place is also compliant with whatever regulations you are following as in your organization. So I think these domain 1 to domain 4, they are pretty much like covering everything. They also are almost equal. So you can see first one was 30%, but then weightage is like 26, 24, 25. So it's not like you can maybe take one of them lightly. You have to make sure that all of the domains are covered, all the task statements are covered as part of preparation for this exam. So that's why I said that, because first topic is around building the infrastructure. We have first have to know the basic building blocks, which is VPCs, maybe Route 53. Another thing which I can think of is different sort of load balancers. Maybe we can cover them. So they will be like good kickstart to our certification journey, because once we know what sort of basics AWS have in terms of AWS networking infrastructure, then we can start building, putting all other building blocks on top of them. So once that baseline is created, we can start creating our building on top of that, and then we can go deeper into which other services and which other tools we have to use as part of AWS networking, and how we can make sure that it's secure as well, how we can make sure that it's scalable as well. Because I was discussing to one of my teammate one day, and we were having this sort of like animated discussions around security versus productivity. So we don't want to end up securing everything but in turn losing the productivity of the organization. Also, we don't want to be highly productive but then it's open to everyone to attack us. So both of these need to be in place, and that's why I feel that this certification fits perfectly into our cloud security journey, because it will help us in understanding how we can make sure that all the gates, like I said, are closed, are covered, are monitored, because ultimately people are coming from some ingress and egress point. And by people, I mean the attackers. They are coming from some ingress and egress points. If you know where those points are, if you know how those points are open, what sort of monitoring is placed on those points, then I think half the battle is won. So yeah, I think this is really good start to our certification journey. In next week episode, I will be covering these basics which I mentioned. Also, I have some incredible idea around one of the topic which is like coming in my mind for quite a while now, which is discussing about AI versus anti-AI. Now, I'm not anti-AI at all. I love using AI tools, means they help us in not only improving my productivity but also delivering this podcast as well. I'm using sort of automation and AI tools to make sure that I'm delivering nice hot content to you guys every week. So that's why it's getting more normal now, because I am using these AI tools to build and deliver to you guys. But then again, there are people who don't like AI, because yeah, some people are still quite reluctant to use AI tools because it's not something they are either familiar with, or they feel like this is something which is not not quite of ethical, because people will feel like, or it's actually heavily discussed in the industry as well, that if you are using AI tools, then you are less using your thinking and your own thought process, you're less using your own brain to find up with unique ideas and solutions, and then you end up in completely relying on these AI tools which you are using in your, like, improving the productivity. So yeah, I am writing something around AI versus anti-AI, and that I'll be covering in next week episode. So kind of like just a normal my thoughts on that topic. And of course then I'll be covering in main episode AWS networking basics as well. So those two exciting topics will be there as part of next week episode. Please continue listening, because every week I'm trying my best to bring to you the better content than last week. So I'm trying to improve every week, and it will help a lot that if you share the word, if you subscribe, if you comment, if it's something which is missing, and I'll try to cover that. I'll try to improve in that aspect as well. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and let's catch up in the next week's episode. Goodbye and good luck.
You've been listening to Cloud, Coffee and Certs. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to follow and share if you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.